Studio One 7 recently dropped, and today we're looking at some of the best new features of this update. Before we get started though, if you want a chance at winning a copy of Studio One 7 and 12 months of updates, then all you have to do is make sure you're subscribed to this channel and then comment below what your new favorite feature is. This giveaway will run for a week after I post this video, so keep a lookout for those dates. But again, if you want to win a free copy of Studio One, all you have to do is make sure you're subscribed and then comment below your favorite feature. Okay, so let's kick things off with the new Splice integration. To access this feature, all you simply have to do is head over to the browser on the bottom right here, click on this, and then if you take a look, we have a new tab and a new category here called Splice. Once you click on this tab, you're going to see this interface with 3 different tabs, and so the first one is simply going to be your home. Here you're going to have a search bar where you can search for any sound that you want and even use some of the popular search tags up here. You can go down and use one of these menus to search either by instruments, by genres, or by cinematic effects. What's even better is that we also have access to Splice's Search with Sound AI function, and the way this works is that you can either drag in an audio file, a MIDI file, or an entire arrangement made up of a collection of a bunch of these events, and it'll search for sounds that are similar within Splice that can complement your song. Now, if you do decide to do an entire arrangement, then what will happen is that it'll basically consolidate it or mix it down to one stereo file, and then use that as a reference to search for similar sounds. The second tab here is simply for your liked sounds, and much like with the standalone app, if you ever come across a sound that you like, you can hit that heart button and it'll save it here for you in this middle column. Now, the last tab here is simply your settings, because you are able to connect this to your existing Splice account to get full functionality of this feature. So let me show you how this works in real time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to my home window here, and I'm going to just simply type in melodic loop. Hit enter, and we get a bunch of search results. So I can hear it all the time. So as you can see here, when you find something that you like, you can simply just hit that heart icon to add it to your likes tab. And then as you can see, that sound just popped up right here for me. Now, something really cool about using the Splice integration is that number one, you don't need the Splice bridge anymore. Now, if you're unfamiliar, the Splice bridge was a necessary plugin that you had to have in your session if you wanted any Splice samples to conform to your session's tempo. This is useful to make sure that the sound that you have or that you're looking for could fit into whatever arrangement you have. And so that was necessary, but with this integration, as you can see here at the bottom, we do get a few controls. So you can automatically change the key right from here. If you hit the transpose, you can kind of change this up. So but additionally, you could also time stretch this loop within the browser before you download to whatever you have in your session to make sure that it matches. So if you take a look here, right now my session is set to 120, which is what this is on. And so if I play that, but at any moment I can half that or double it. Now this sample is set to 85, so let me switch my session over to that, and let's take a listen. Now once you have a sample that you like, it is as easy as dragging it into your timeline, and then what will happen here is that it is going to download and place it on your session. Now, something important to note here is that whenever you do download a sample from Splice by dragging it to your timeline, then Splice is going to download it to the media folder of your Studio One song. So if you take a look here, if I go over to my song folder for this Studio One session and I open up the media folder, you are going to see that sample that I just downloaded. Now, I'm assuming this was done because if you were to maybe collaborate with somebody and send them the file, or maybe just change where this song folder is located, you want to make sure that your sounds stay intact, and that way you're not missing anything in your session. Now, all in all, I am really happy with this integration because I specifically use Splice a lot for a lot of drum foley, a lot of like percussive material, and so having it here in the browser is going to be so much better for me. Now, the one thing that I don't know is how the credits here are going to work with this integration, because at least in the standalone app, whenever you downloaded a sound to your computer, it would use a credit. But here, what's happening is that unless that sound is already in your media folder, it is going to download it over and over again. So will it use credits all the time if you want to re-download things, like in a different session? Or how does it know? I'm not quite certain. What I do know though is that from what I was told, any Studio One user can sign up for a 7-day trial of Splice, so that way you can test out all of these features, which is really awesome. Additionally, it seems that Splice is going to have a new unlimited tier for Studio One users, and so that would sort of solve the sample issue. If you could just have one fee that you pay a month for unlimited samples, then you're pretty much set. But again, I'm not quite certain how that would work for people like me who already have an existing Splice subscription with samples, so I'll keep you guys posted. All right, moving on, the next biggest feature is AI stem separation. Okay, so the way this works is that once you have some sort of audio file, to access the stem separation feature, all you have to do is right-click, go over to audio, and then under the audio processing tab right here, you're going to select separate stems. Now, once you do that, you're going to get this pop-up window, and here you're going to be able to choose what you want the AI to extract. So for example, if you wanted to only extract the vocals for some sort of like remix, then you would just click the first option. However, if you want to manipulate everything individually, then you could also click drums, bass, and other. And once you do that, just hit OK. Now, the cool thing about this feature is that it's going to separate everything and then put the individual instruments on their own track, and also put them in a folder for easy organization, on top of the fact that it also mutes the original so you're not hearing things twice. So let's see what happened here. Let's go ahead and play the original first so you get an idea. And I'm gonna switch this over to 85 so we get the original tempo. Super cool. So now let's take a listen to what the AI stem separation did. So this here looks like it is the vocals. Nuts. There were no drums in this original sample, but there was a bass. And then we did have some keys and guitars, I believe. Amazing. So as you can see, this gives us so many more options for creativity and control, and I cannot wait to dive into this. Now, something else to point out here, though, is that if you say, for example, only wanted a couple of different stems, so let me do that again to show you really quickly, separate stems. Let's say you only wanted to do maybe the vocals and then the guitars and keys. You also have the option here at the bottom to consolidate this. And what this basically means is that instead of separating everything into individual files, it is going to do a mix down of whatever stems you selected. Let me show you. So again, I'm going to pick here vocals and then other, which was the keys and the guitars. Let's make sure we check this box and look what happens. So as you can see here, it did mute the original as before, but now instead of getting a folder, now that we consolidated everything, we get one single file that just includes the vocals and the guitars and keys. Essentially, we basically just took out the bass. So I am incredibly excited to use this into my workflow. I know there are many people who've been wanting this update as well, so I'm finally glad that PreSonus was able to add this in. Okay, next up we have the new integrated clip launcher. Now, if you're unfamiliar, this is similar to the clips feature in Ableton, and essentially it is a grid of cells that allow you to either drag or record sounds into them and then mix and match for either a live performance or for arrangement purposes. So let's take a look here. To access the launcher, you're gonna click this icon right over here, and when you do this, you're going to get a new screen to the right. Now, once you do this, you can choose to leave this in the side-by-side view, which is what I currently have at the moment, or if you drop down this arrow, you can also do the exclusive view, which will take up the entire window. Personally, I like the side-by-side, but you pick whatever suits you. Now, what happens here is that for every new track that you add to the timeline, you're going to get a new row of cells. And so to show you that in real time, if I were to drag in an impact, say maybe I wanted to add drums to this arrangement, then you can see a new row of cells has appeared. Now also notice that as I start to add tracks and new rows of cells start to appear, we can also view them vertically in what Studio One is calling scenes. Once you start to build out your grid of cells, you can either choose to play the entire column or scene by pressing the play button at the top here, or you can choose to play individual parts by clicking on the play button for that individual cell. And so if you want to get sounds into these cells, you can simply just drag it over. And as you can see here, now this entire loop can be played by pressing on this cell icon. Now from there, I can decide to maybe separate the stems here for this loop and then drag every individual part into a different cell to get that separation. And so the way that works is I'm going to simply drag that into here. Boom, there it is. Let's do the bass. And so now I can choose to either play the entire sample by pressing play on this one cell, or I can just play the vocal, the bass, or the the rest of the instruments. Now, as mentioned, this also works with MIDI, so let me record some drums and I'll show you how that works. Okay, so from here, I can simply just drag this MIDI event over to a cell, and as you can see, I'm starting to build out my scenes. Now, something important to note here is that you can always designate what you want playing, either the timeline or the clip launcher by clicking on this arrow at the top. So, for example, if it points to the left, then you are playing from the timeline. And if you're pointing to the right, then it's playing from the clip launcher. Additionally, you could also mix and match. So for example, if I wanted my loop to play from the launcher, then I'm gonna make sure to come down here to the track, make sure that arrow is pointing to the right. But if I wanted my drums to play from the timeline, then I can just simply click this arrow to have it point left. So let's take a listen now. Right? We got the drums playing. Now let's play the sample with everything. Let's swap over to just the instruments. Let's swap over to the bass. Woo! Now, additionally, because this is all talking to each other, at any moment you can simply double click on any cell to open up the editor for either the MIDI or the audio and make any changes that you want. Now, other notable features here with the clip launcher is that you can also record straight into the cells, and you can organize your scenes into what Studio One is calling playlists. So if you take a look here on the far top right, if you click this button, you're going to get this new window. And from here, you can obviously see your scenes at the bottom, but you can also drag them to the top to order these scenes in any way that you'd like. So for example, if I wanted to go from this scene, scene 1, to scene 3, which only contains the bass, then I can do that, and then maybe back to scene 1, and then maybe only the instruments. You can arrange this in whatever order you want. Now, I know that this feature specifically in Ableton is used a lot for live performances, and you can certainly do that here as well, but I am more interested to see how I can use this as an arrangement workflow, because as you can see here, you can very, very easily use this to mix and match different sections to see what could sound better for your arrangement. And so the way that would work is that once you sort of create your playlist out of different scenes that you like I have done here, then you can insert this into your timeline, into your arrangement by clicking this downwards arrow and then hitting insert playlist into song. From here, you can choose to either insert at the cursor, so it'll do that there, super awesome, or you can choose to replace the entire arrangement that you currently have. And so to do that, let's hit replace, hit OK, and then boom. Let's go ahead and switch over to the timeline. Again, I am so pumped to have this because I really want to see how this works for me in terms of an arrangement tool. All right, moving on, we have the new interactive scale features and the new loop controls. Now let's go ahead and start with loop controls because I think this one is a small update, but man, is it going to make life easier for me when it comes to arranging. So before, if I wanted to sort of duplicate an element, and I usually do because I like to keep at least one element in my songs throughout the entire duration for familiarity. Before, I would have to select that, hit the D key to duplicate, right? Or just select multiple and do that as well. And that can take a bit of time. It's not crazy, but it does sort of pile up over time. Well, now, if you hover over the bottom of any event, both MIDI and audio, you're gonna get this new little icon here. And then all you simply have to do is drag until you want the loop to stop. Super awesome. And again, it works with MIDI. So if I do that there, I just basically looped this entire sample and drum portion for a couple of bars. The other cool new loop feature here is that, let's say, for example, you already had your song set from beginning to end. And let me do that here. Let me go open up my toolbar. Let's hit the set end. So boom, there it is. And let's say that my end was somewhere here, okay? So once you have that there, you could also choose to select a couple of different events or individual events, right click and then hit loop. and it'll extend until the end marker. So awesome. Okay, moving on to the new scale features. If I open up a note editor for this presence here, you can see that from before, we have always had the ability to set a scale and to lock that in. So to do that before, you just go over to the left, and we still have this, of course. Click a scale, let's do D, we do maybe D major, and then lock that in. Now, we've already had this, and now Studio One has expanded on it, because if you click on this new scale or keyboard icon at the top, you're going to get this brand new panel. Now, the first sort of section on this panel is basically the same thing as the one on the side window. You can simply click a different scale and then snap it to the grid. However, the new thing here is that they've allowed us to create our own scales. And so, for example, if I wanted to go off of the C major, but I wanted to include this note here, and then this one, and then maybe not that one, and then this one. As you can see here, this starts to shift in real time. And then once you have a scale that you like, you can simply save it by pressing on this paper icon and then storing that as a preset. So that's super handy, and I'm glad it's more upfront, but what I'm really excited about is the pitch visibility option here to the right. The all setting will simply allow you to see all notes you have programmed regardless of whether they are in the scale or not. Now, once I have some chords down, if I were to maybe, I don't know, switch one of these notes to be out of the scale, so now it's red, and the way you do that, by the way, is you go over to note color and switch it to scale. Once I have this here and I hit all, you're basically just going to see everything. This is like the default view. No matter if it's in the scale or out of the scale, if I hit snap, you're still going to see every single note that you have programmed. Now, the Use tab here to the far right is basically a condensed version of all, because you're still going to see all the notes that you've programmed, whether in or out of the scale, but just the ones that you have programmed. So take a look here. If I click Used, then I'm still going to see all the notes in the scale, the blue, and even the ones out of the scale, the red, but it's only going to show me the ones that I have programmed, which can be really handy if you just want a consolidated view of whatever you're playing. However, my favorite here is going to be in scale, because if you click on that, it is only going to show you notes that fall within whatever scale you selected. Now, it'll still sort of show you any wrong ones, because as you can see here, I can see that red one, but it's minimized. And most importantly, every single lane here on the piano roll now pertains to a note that falls within the scale. Now, even more interesting than that, if you look closely, you can also see that in this mode, notes get assigned their respective numeral number. So for example, on this F major chord that is made up of the notes F, A, and C, you can see that the F note is the 4th note of that scale. The A is the 6th note of that scale, and then the C, of course, is the 1st note of the scale. Okay, so while in the scale mode, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swap these chords really quickly just so it fits with our progression. So let me go ahead and bring this up to an A minor, so right there. Let's go ahead and duplicate that about right there. Duplicate that over again, and then what I'll probably do is make that into a C. Okay, so perfect. So as you can see, this makes it really easy to start working in Studio One, and I am really pumped to have this feature. Okay, moving on, we have 2 more small but mighty features that are going to save me personally a lot of time, and that is the global transpose and the advanced BPM detection features. Let's start with global transpose. Now, oftentimes when I'm in studio sessions, the artist will go, okay, the beat sounds cool, but can we raise it by like 2 semitones or bring it down so that we can change the key? And normally this is a pain in the butt because it requires for me to open up the MIDI and then swap the MIDI notes up and down manually, or go over to the audio and then use the transpose feature here. But again, that's on a event per event basis, so it takes a while. Well, now if you notice towards the bottom near the transport controls, we have a new transpose feature. So the way this works is that you're gonna wanna go over to your sounds that you want to be affected by this. And so I'm gonna do the audio sample, open up the inspector window, and then click on the follow global transpose checkbox. Now, once you have those boxes checked, all you simply have to do is change the transpose parameter here to change the key of everything that you've selected in real time. Take a listen. And the cool part, as you are seeing now, is that it also changes the key of the entire session in real time. I started with an A minor, but if I were to bring this down 2 semitones, we're now in G minor. Now, once you are at a new key that you're comfortable with, all you simply have to do is go over to that transpose feature here, right click, and then hit freeze global transposition. And what this will basically do is now make all those changes permanent. So check this out. Look at the notes here on the note editor. So as you can see, it's shifted everything for me. Once we decide on a new key, I don't have to do this manually for every single event. It's just a single button click and it's so convenient. Now, aside from this global transpose feature, Studio One 7 also includes new and improved algorithms for BPM detection. Now, the way that works is that you'd go to any audio event, right click, go over to audio, and then under the audio bend feature, select detect tempo. From there, open up your inspector window, and then you can see the tempo here at the bottom, file tempo. If you see a number, that means that that is a tempo that was embedded into the audio file. And if it says map, then that means that your audio file has a variable tempo, meaning that it changes from time to time. Now, once you have your tempo selected, like before in other versions of Studio One, you can very simply just drag it over to the tempo track to kind of adopt that for your session. So if I were to change this to 120 here, and I were to drag it over to the top, once it has its tempo detected, it'll set the 85 BPM for that portion. Of course, you can very easily just do this from one click. If you go over to audio and then extract the tempo track, it does the exact same thing, all in one go. All right, moving on, we have a couple of new VSTs and VST improvements, so let's talk about it. Okay, so VST improvement number 1 is that now impact can be opened directly in the note editor. Now, the way you do that is you open up the note editor like you normally would, and then you would click on this little icon right over here. It's kind of like this grid icon. And as you can see here, impact gets loaded right beside everything. And so this is really awesome if you have maybe a laptop and you're working with smaller spaces. You don't necessarily have to have this floating, VST icon or interface anymore. You can simply just integrate it directly into your note editor. Additionally, Impact also has a new copy parameters function, which allows you to copy any settings from one pad to the other. Now in Impact, we've always had the ability to copy a sound to another pad simply by clicking on it and then holding the Command or Control key and then copying that over. However, we now also have the ability to just copy parameters. So for example, if I wanted to copy this, let's say we pitch it up, right? We also maybe add a little bit of gain, and then I mess with the filter. If I wanted this into this snare, all I have to do is press the Command or Control key plus the Option or Alt key and then drag that over, and we can simply copy those parameters very, very easily. Additionally, we now also have the ability to copy or basically drag any sample from Impact into Sample 1. Before, we could drag a sample from Sample 1 to Impact, but not vice versa. But with this new update, if you click on a sound here on Impact, hold the Command or Control key, you can drag that over, and that way program different pitches for that sound in the Sample 1 note editor. Continuing this sort of drag and drop functionality, you also now have the ability to drag samples straight into the pattern editor. Now, I don't really use this quite often, but you can now go over to either your browser, or I'm assuming maybe even Splice too. Let's try it out. Let's go over to one of these, and let me grab this clap, drag it over to, boom, it works, perfect. And then from here, of course, once it's loaded, you can start to click in your, you can start to click these in, and it'll work. Finally, with Impact, you also now have the ability to create an instrument part out of a chopped audio loop. Let me show you. So let me go ahead and create a new instance of Impact by holding the Option or Alt key, and I'm gonna drag down here, and I'm gonna delete all this. Let's solo it. And so what will happen is I'm going to create, let's do a default here, so empty pads. Let's look for an audio loop, or a drum loop rather, from Splice. So drum loop. Let's go ahead and see what we got. Okay, so I like this loop right here. From there, what you want to do is go ahead and drag the sample over to the first pad, but before you let go, hold the Shift key, and as you can see, it'll say slice and spread across multiple pads. From there, let go, and it'll chop everything up into individual pads here in Impact. Now, this is not new, but what is new is that if you take a look here, it also created an instrument part that is made up of all the chops that was created in MIDI form in sequential order. So now you get this. And now, obviously, this is incredibly useful because you can start to sort of move these around to create new grooves. So it just gives you more flexibility and control whenever you decide to do this workflow. Now, Impact was not the only one that got a bit of an improvement. We also have some new updates to Presence. Now, Presence, as we know, is our sample-based VST in Studio One, and so you could always just simply pick from whatever sounds are here, but with this new update, we also have this new editor, and when you click on that, you are able to basically create your own patches. Now, I'm not quite sure how to use this. I'm not a sound designer, but from what I understand, this is exactly what sound designers for Presence have been using to create different banks. And so if you're someone who dives into that world, then you now have a built-in editor to create your own patches for Presence as well. Now, moving on to new VSTs, we have 2, or rather 1.5 new additions to Studio One 7. First things first, we have a brand new VST here called Deep Flight 1. And from what I understand, this used to be a sound patch for Presence that has now been further developed into its own standalone VST. Now, I haven't tried it yet, but it looks awesome and it does remind me of Lead Architect. Speaking of Lead Architect, this is also the new addition because before, if you remember, this was only available if you're a part of their subscription Studio One Plus. Well, since the release of 7, Lead Architect is now available for everyone. Now, finally, here we have a new utility VST. I'm not really quite sure how to describe this because it doesn't really make sound on its own, but it's called CV Instrument. And what this basically does, from what I understand, is it allows you to interface Studio One with your external hardware so that you can control your synths or what have you. Now, I don't have any analog synths here in the studio, so I can't test this for you, but if you do have analog gear like synths and that kind of thing, then this might be really useful to you. That way you're able to control everything from one place. Now, the last final update to this virtual instrument category for now is that we now have a dedicated new instrument bus for any VST that requires multiple outputs. So let me show you here what I mean with impact. If I open up my mixing console, traditionally it looks a little something like this. You're going to have multiple outputs for every pad of the impact once you sort of set it up. And as a brief little kind of explainer here, you do that by dropping down this menu and then selecting what pads you want to associate with what channels, basically just creating those in your mixer. And this is fine, but it often takes up a ton of space. And so what happens if you just want to consolidate things? Before, you really couldn't, but now if you take a look here, whenever you do create these new channels for these pads in Impact, you're going to get one single unit that is going to be called Impact in this case, but you're also going to get this little folder icon at the bottom. And if you click on that, it is going to collapse every single other channel within that instrument. Now, this is really awesome because, again, it is going to, one, allow you to consolidate and clean up your session a little bit better, but it also kind of auto routes it for you. And so if I wanted to add any sort of insert into, say, my snare, I could add it here. But if I wanted to process my drums all together, I don't have to go through the process of creating another bus and then routing those. It automatically does it for me. If I drag anything here, it's going to affect all my drums. Now, there are many more little updates that are almost impossible to cover in one video, but those include Ableton Link support, clap plugin and instrument support, improved audio gain options for plugins, improved loop browser with better tagging, natural sorting and additional loop info, improved event appearance here on the timeline, a detachable browser, and much, much more. So there you have it. Those are the biggest updates in Studio One 7. This is definitely a producer update, and because now we have these sort of 12-month update things, I expect new additions to get added continuously. And of course, if you guys want to see anything, drop it down in the comments, send it to me. I can definitely forward that to PreSonus, and hopefully we get to see more cool producer updates in the future. Now, if you made it this far into the video, which I know is a bit of a long one, then I appreciate you. And to show you that, here is 3 months of free Splice, and then here is 30% off of anything at PreSonus.com, I believe. So obviously that's on a first come, first served basis, but there you go. Now, as a reminder, if you also want to win a free copy of Studio One 7, then all you have to do is make sure you're subscribed to the channel and then comment your favorite feature down below. Make sure to stay tuned for future Studio One 7 videos. And if you want to see my impressions and thoughts about their new business model, then make sure to click right over here.